Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to one more speaker series from the Institute of Ethics in AI. My name is Christoph Lüdke. I'm Professor of Business Ethics at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm the Director of the IEAI. With our speaker series, we invite experts from all over the world to talk about ethics and governance of AI. These events serve as an important platform for sharing new research and exchanging knowledge. Since our launch in 2019, we were already able to run 38 speaker series events with distinguished guests from all over the world. Today's topic is participatory AI: for whom, for what? And we have the pleasure of having Daniel Gatica-Perez with us. He directs the Social Computing Group at the IEAI Research, I hope I spelled that correctly, Institute, and is a professor with EPFL School of Engineering and College of Humanities in Lausanne. His research studies how people and technology interface in everyday life. His work integrates human-centered methods, mobile and social technologies, social participation, and citizen science to support communities, cities, public health, and the environment. He also works with organizations on social innovation projects. We will start with a presentation, and afterwards we will have the opportunity to hear your questions and comments. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. So Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining this talk. The title is Participatory AI: for whom and for what? And I would like to start with a local story. So I would like to argue that most of the people who are using AI today are not like us. If you think about the general public, there are many other ways in which people think about AI, use AI, or decide not to use it. And this is an example of a very local magazine that is produced by the largest store in Switzerland, that essentially one can joke that if something happens in this Migros magazine, which is the name of the company, then it's for real, because this is essentially reaching every household in the country. And you can see that in 2023, there was already something about AI and the importance of understanding the basic terms. So that's a bit for the general public. Another local story, also in the context of Switzerland, where I live and work, is how it had started being used in the political game. This is also news from last year, where one of the parties decided to use generative AI to produce the image you see in the right side of the slide, to promote certain values, to advocate for certain agendas. And there was already the first controversy in the Swiss political system about the ethics of using artificial imaging as part of political campaigns. Clearly, there's a lot of other stories, and this one comes from New York. Perhaps you are aware of it, because this one is not that local. Essentially, the city of New York released an AI chatbot to support citizens in some of their needs with respect to the services that the city provides. And it was found through some journalistic analysis that essentially the chatbot would tell businesses to break the law because of the failures that these machines can have. So this is just for, say, citizens in the Western world, but we have more than that. It is well known that in the so-called majority world, so the countries outside North America and Europe, are also limited with respect to the data sets that the pipelines that feed AI currently use. This is an example that is well known, is already from several years ago, where some researchers actually show that roughly half of the data that fed the most important AI systems from the perspective of image data essentially was generated in two countries, the US and the United Kingdom. And this is a sobering plot, because it essentially shows how well certain countries are in what AI sees and how poorly represented most of the world is with respect to that matter. Now, in an AI pipeline, data is just the beginning, but at the end, what matters is the experience of people who have to use AI or are asked to use AI. And this is also an area of research for which there's an increasing amount of work and also an increasing concern. In the majority world, essentially, it is more and more evident that the systems are not designed for everyone, and that very fact essentially reproduces inequities in power with respect to multiple human dimensions, whether it is race, ethnicity, class, or caste. So as we can see, if we start thinking about AI from the side of people, you can actually see some of the potential concerns or some of the actual pitfalls that technology currently brings. In the discourse by technologies, you typically see these words, right? You see each of these: responsible AI, trustworthy AI, explainable AI, or equitable AI, as things that technologies would like to fix. But if we just think about these words for a moment, what they would suggest is that we actually are right now at the other end. And the question is whether we should challenge these views more seriously. And what can we do about it, not only as researchers or as academics, but more generally as citizens. So this is essentially the backdrop of the story I wanted to tell you today, and why we are interested in working on participatory AI. Participatory AI is a set of methods that are currently being used that have evolved over time. I'm not particularly keen to give you a formal definition, but rather to tell you about the values that are behind some of the methods that are being studied and explored these days. I would like to start with a quote from a professor at the University of Michigan, Kentaro Toyama, who over many years worked at Microsoft Research, specifically in the lab in Bangalore. He came up with something that is now known among technologists as the technology's laws of amplification, which essentially states that technology's primary effect is to amplify human forces. So if we start from that perspective, one key question would be, well, if we can amplify, what human forces should we amplify, right? So this is a first hint of what we would like to do in this participatory approach. The second comes back to the issue of data in the pipeline of AI. And it is also well known that data is fundamentally social. Here I'm quoting work from Sarah Brain, who has studied AI and technology more generally in the context of police in the US. She argues that at every phase, from adoption to collection to analysis, all the way to institutional intervention and reception, there's always a social patterning about how data is used. And here I'm also quoting Nick Siever, a sociologist, who argues that if you cannot see the human in the loop, you just need to look for a bigger loop, which essentially goes to say that we people are always embedded in the pipeline of AI at different levels. And it is important to remind the role we play and somehow how often we become invisible in those loops. Now, designing systems that reflect or conform human values is nothing new. Batya Friedman for many years has advocated for this concept called value-sensitive design about the design of systems more generally. And these are some of the values that she talks about in her well-known book. You can see that some of them are partly echoing the ways in which AI is now adjectivized, whether it is responsible, whether it is equitable, or whether it is interpretable. But certainly those values that are the core human values have been there for a long time. All right, so these are essentially some of the basic concepts that are underneath the set of methods that are used in participatory AI. My personal take when I approach research in this domain essentially is to try to look at these basic questions and try to see what we can do about it in a systematic way. The first one is, of course, what human forces shall we amplify, given the power that these technologies can bring? The second one responds to the importance of keeping always people into account, how to accompany people in the loop. Not only in the loop of using AI, but also in the loop of generating data for AI or labeling data for AI, or resisting AI or deciding not to use it. And of course, there are very important questions associated to this, as in who decides what forces and who decides how to accompany, who benefits from answering those questions or not, or who doesn't. So at the core of what we are doing, you will see there are some technological developments, but there's also conceptual frameworks and some debate behind what we do. So this view of thinking about AI or other ways in which citizens or more generally the public is engaged is nicely summarized in a very recent piece by researchers at the Data Society Institute that was published early this month, where they make a separation between AI literacy, AI governance, or participatory AI. I won't go into the details of each of these approaches. What I wanted to just to highlight today is that there's already some work towards systematizing what each of these different ways to think about the interaction between the public and AI is or could be, and you can see the kind of question that could allow us to categorize each of these approaches, as in which science and public initiative best resonate with the approach, which is the imaginary of a good citizen, who is a good citizen, what's the role of democracy, and what are the limitations of each of these approaches. So for those who would like to learn more about participatory AI as a concept, this is an excellent resource. Now, we have been doing work that many years ago was not called participatory AI, but I think if we now look at it retrospectively, you will see that many of the elements are there. So I would like to present for the rest of the talk 3 case studies. One that was done about research I started 10 years ago and continued for several years, and 2 more case studies that are a bit more recent. The first one I present today is called Sensitivity, which is a collaboration that we did with colleagues in Latin America. More specifically, we did this research in Mexico. Just for some statistics, the country right now has about 130 million inhabitants. It's a country of young people, and it's a country of cities. So any research we do to support cities or to support youth is relevant in this context. This is the city, a specific city in which we worked. It's a city called Guanajuato, which is in the center of the country, which is at the same time historical. As you can see, a historical treasure. So the city is known for its monuments, and it does host perhaps the largest cultural festival in Latin America. But then at the same time, it does have, as most Latin American cities have, other issues that require attention. And with our collaborators in Mexico, we set up a framework to essentially invite and work with very young people to reason about their concerns with respect to the urban environment. And we'll get into details in a minute, but the basic idea was to work with youth to document and then reason about their city from their perspective, then bring a little bit of computer vision, or AI, you would call it today, to analyze some of the image that was, some of the images that were collected, and finally create dialogue through the perspective of young people. So I would like to go into these details in the next minutes. The goal that the research team set out to address was to answer the question on how could local youth be engaged and supported to document and reflect about their urban environment. There has been quite a lot of work in environmental psychology about the subjective perception of urban spaces with dimensions like how accessible a place is, or how well preserved it is, how aesthetic it is, or how safe it is for citizens. In this multidisciplinary approach, one of the issues that was important for us to understand is exactly the question on what issues are young people more sensitive about, because it might be that the perception of young people and the perception of adults are not necessarily matching. So we had a 4-stage approach in which we first did a co-design phase, which worked as follows. We invited students at the high school level to work with the research team on the ground. And based on them, we organized participatory sessions by which people could decide to join the project, and then to decide collectively questions like what issues they wanted to focus on to analyze their city, specific dimensions of interest, and also what city areas they wanted to explore. The goal was essentially to recruit about 100 students who would be willing to explore the city and collect data. The second stage was exactly about that, something we call the Urban Data Challenge, in which youth working as teams decided to explore certain areas of the city and collect images about something they were either concerned about or proud of. And you see some snapshots there. The data that was collected by students was then labeled by other students. So here we're essentially looking at the whole pipeline of AI, from data collection to data annotation, and you will see later to inferences by machines. So we collected with the students several thousand images, and then those images were labeled by other students in the same high school with respect to the psychological subjective attributes you see on the left of the slide. Characteristics like how a place was perceived from the perspective of whether it was dangerous or dirty or happy or interesting or pretty or polluted and so on. So these are dimensions often used in environmental psychology. With the data produced by local students, we then were able to compare in a systematic way the perception of students with respect to these dimensions, and also to compare them again against other forms of observers, notably workers in the Mechanical Turk Amazon platform. For those who might be familiar with that, this is an online service that allows people to offer their labor, to engage in so-called microtasks that would typically involve annotating some data or making some decisions that can be done online. So what this slide shows is essentially the comparison with respect to some standard principal component analysis on how these dimensions could be aggregated or mapped, whether the data came from local students, as you see in the left, or where the data came from Mechanical Turk workers. And you can see the plots without getting into the details. Each of these dimensions might have some similarities and might have some differences. What this allows us to do in a systematic way is essentially to do comparisons using statistical methods. Once data is collected and then annotated, the next step in the pipeline of AI is essentially to train a machine and to ask the machine to make inferences. And this is an example of an image collected by students that shows an alley with some graffiti and perhaps some trash on the floor. And then you can see on the right side of the slide the heat map that a machine produced, where a heat map corresponds as a color-coded image, where red corresponds to the areas of the image that the machine used to make the decision. That in this particular case, the decision was that this image was an alley. So what we used, not only by using this AI system at the time, we engaged students in dialogue about how they felt about how machines, what machines could tell about their city. And that was an interesting way of also eliciting discussions with young people with respect to their own perceptions of technology, perhaps risks that they could see on technology being used on cities, also in the particular city, some of the tensions with government and so on. Finally, this participatory approach ended by providing means to students to create short films. And what we did with our colleagues in Mexico was to provide them with the images they had collected. They also conducted interviews, not only among themselves, but also with other citizens in Guanajuato. And finally, they produced short films in which they reflected about their experience, their views of how certain aspects, especially the ones that would need improvement in their city, could be addressed. And we ended up creating a YouTube film festival that was finally shared with the students in school. And it's still online. If you're interested, you can send me an email and I can share the link with you, where the views of the youth were finally shared and uploaded on social media for posterity. All right, so this essentially is an early example on how we can use participatory methods to work jointly with people about issues they care about, and the role that AI systems could play in this kind of action research experiences. I'm going to now tell you a second case study that is the result of a European project that has been running over the last 4 years. The name of the project is Icarus, and it does have also a very local component, in this case with multiple cities in Europe. Let's go into the details. So the Icarus project is a consortium, as you can see, of multiple institutions that involves research institutes, and notably, as you can see in red, 6 cities across Europe: Stuttgart, Riga, Rotterdam, Nice, Torino, and Lisbon. The goal of the project is essentially to co-design approaches for urban security in which both city authorities and citizens are part of the design of such solutions or such approaches. The project addressed 4 areas of focus, which are, as you see them on the slide, preventing juvenile delinquency, preventing radicalization, designing and managing safe public spaces, and preventing and reducing organized crime. So as you can see, these are very broad topics and very complex situations that cities are facing on a regular basis. As part of the initial stages of the project, each of the 6 cities first decided to focus on one of the 4 areas and then to work on co-design experiences to find solutions for some of the needs they had along one of the axes. So in the end, the cities of Torino and Lisbon focus on preventing juvenile delinquency, Stuttgart focus on radicalization, Nice and Riga focus on public spaces, and Rotterdam focus on the important issue of organized crime. The project had a phase, I would say a long phase of not only understanding the literature about how these solutions exist and have been produced, but also to detect common themes that could lead to not only common understanding for cities about how to think about these issues, but also eventually to come up with frameworks that could be applicable across both citizens' constituencies and also cities themselves. One of the first elements that became evident was the need for design. And here I'm going to quote work from some of our colleagues working in the early stages of the project, where as a consortium, we agreed that human-centered design solutions afford sensitivity to local context, a focus on the nature of the problems to be addressed, and on the ways in which people use and adapt solutions. So if we start from these basic principles, it will be clear that involving communities in the design of these solutions has a number of advantages. One of them will be local ownership and participation. And another one that is very, very important is to ensure that local context is accounted for from day one. So design was one of the main 3 axes of the work we set out to do afterwards. The second one, of course, was data. And in this case, it was clear that we need good quality data collection and sharing, specifically when there's a need to share this across multiple organizations. And clearly it's indispensable to ethically manage data, not only with respect to how it's shared, but actually how it's used. The issue of data is clearly reflected in the European regulation, but nevertheless, it was an important lesson for some of our partners in the city space with respect to potential risks that had not been anticipated. That was the second axis. And then the third potential axis that came quickly into play is whether AI should be used or not in these solutions. The review of the existing work up to the moment the deliverable was produced was that, well, it is largely an uncharted territory. And there are a lot of risks, specifically with respect to the opacity that these algorithms can have by design, to the fact that it is not clear what assumptions about behavior and risk are embedded in the technologies. And fundamentally, there's another issue, which is the ethical and normative questions about the values that these systems embed. So artificial intelligence was potentially a third axis of the project, but as you will see in the next slide, it turned out to be not so important. We decided to use a design thinking methodology to work with the different stakeholders. So I assume some of you are familiar with design thinking. It is a quite well-established technique in the design community that is based on 5 steps that would allow to have a way of getting input from distinct voices and differentiating in different positions that would eventually result in tools that could be validated in practice. So the first step, which is called empathize, engages with end users to define in the second stage the main issues and to create a problem statement. In the third stage, there's a participatory process by which ideas are explored collectively to think about the problem that needs to be addressed. And once the ideas are proposed and a participatory process is set in place to essentially choose the ones that will go into implementation, the fourth stage has to do with the actual building prototypes for the solution to be tested in the last phase of the methodology. So you can imagine that with 6 cities and with 4 focus areas, applying the science thinking methodology was a big challenge. It was a hugely rewarding experience, I think, for all the members of the consortium. And the amount of local knowledge and the amount of specificities in each of these cities tested the limits of what design thinking can do. It also tested the limits to a good extent on what local democracies can do. There's a ton of knowledge that is implicit, that some of it is going to go into documentation, and the rest of it is essentially the complexity of human behavior, of human interacting with other humans, trying to negotiate objectives that are sometimes not well aligned or sometimes even opposing. So the application of the design thinking methodology in each of the cities produce very different designs, and I'm not going to have the time to go into all of these designs. I would like to focus on one of the cases in which my team was closely involved. This is the project that was led by the city of Turin, that, if you remember, was focused on the issue of juvenile delinquency. The project that is when it has been implemented is called Sbocciamo Torino, which translates like Let's Blossom Turin, and it's the following. From the methodological perspective, we essentially propose a model that, for lack of a better name, we are now calling evidence-informed participatory governance, which is essentially a model that allows for the participation of multiple stakeholders that might have differing objectives and that need to, through the support of evidence, collaborate and then produce common outputs. This is work that emerged from the work that the city of Torino initiated, and that now has taken a little bit more of a conceptual support. Now, in practice, what the city of Torino did was to say, we don't really need a lot of technology. What we need is that people actually talk. And the Sbocciamo Torino tool, as we call it in the project, is essentially, you would call it a socio-technical system that essentially embeds three components. The first component is a committee of stakeholders, that it is composed of the various agencies that are involved in youth support and other specific offices targeted with the prevention of juvenile delinquency. The second component of the tool is data and a way of visualizing it. So more specifically, a dashboard with data on the different kind of data set that could be provided by the multiple stakeholders, by the city, by, for instance, the open portal data, and other information that would be relevant to have discussions about the state of youth, involving, for instance, information about public spaces and school districts and so on. The third component is essentially getting people to talk. And for this, the multi-party discussions that are organized are meant to have a structured approach to be able to analyze causes, co-create potential actions, and ultimately produce outputs for the city authorities to consider. The way in which the data is used is essentially to support these collaborative discussions rather than to lead any kind of discussion. And I think it's important that I make this very explicit. This is a human-centered design. It's not a technology-driven design. And it was found through the design thinking methodology that there was a place for technology from the perspective of basic data analysis and visualization, but there was no space for AI. The project is in its last phases. It officially will finish in August, and there will be documentation and papers that document these approaches in a lot of detail. I wanted to use this as a concrete case in which the outcome of a participatory approach could be to decline the use of AI. And I think this is an important output, also to make it very explicit, that not because we are supposed to work with AI, it means that we should always use it. And this is a good example on where a participatory process that engaged multiple stakeholders resulted in the decision that simpler technologies and a lot of human interaction would perform well for the task and the goal that the city had in mind. All right, so we move into the last case study that I wanted to introduce today, which is related to this concept of AI literacy that perhaps some of you have seen either in academic literature or in some corporate documentation. Coming back to the AI chatbot from the city of New York, what went wrong? So here I'm going to retake the journalistic analysis that was conducted, and it's publicly available in the link you see there. So journalists essentially conducted an audit of this chatbot, and essentially they asked questions. They prompted the chatbot with specific questions, and they analyzed the responses. So you see on the left side the kind of questions that journalists submitted. Can I take a cut of my workers' tips, which is clearly an unethical question, perhaps also a non-legal one. And then you can see the answer that the chatbot provided. Yes, you can take a cut of your workers' tips. Or the question, do landlords have to accept tenants on rental assistance? Which is also a violation of the law if in case they did that. And then the answer of the chatbot was, no, landlords are not required to accept tenants on rental assistance, which is essentially a form of discrimination. And then the last column of the slide actually shows what is the reality, right? What is what the law says about what is possible or what is legal and not. You could imagine that you could be applying this to essentially every chatbot today, and with enough time, you will find similar pitfalls. The city of New York decided to include a disclaimer that you can see there about the limitations may occasionally produce incorrect, harmful, or biased content, which is, I guess, a safe disclaimer to put. But the question is this enough? And this is enough from the legal perspective. Is it enough from the ethical perspective? I don't think there's anything special about the New York City case, except that it's a very big city that will attract a lot of attention from the media. I think more generally, the question that to me is important to ask is, when technology has been let loose so quickly, it's not surprised that this happens. The question that follows is, what should we do? What should be done about it? And to me, this is largely a problem of literacy, literacy of all of us, the general public, engineers, researchers, CEOs, governments. There has been some recent literature, and here I'm quoting a concrete definition of AI literacy as provided by Long and McGurko, where they define literacy in AI as a set of competencies that enables individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate and collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool online, at home, in the workplace. So essentially what competencies you need to have to be able to use these technologies. It is clear since the emergence of ChatGPT that these elements of literacy are needed, sometimes for very practical reasons, but quite often for compliance reasons, for legal reasons, and certainly for ethical reasons. And it's very clear also that with the explosion of tools, as it has happened in the last 12 months, on one hand, whatever we can say today will be likely superseded in the next few months. And some of the existing frameworks might lack some specificity, specifically with respect to generative AI. And also we're going to need some form of tailored approaches, so tools can AI tools can be used properly, legally, and compliant in specific scenarios. So again, we are back to what human forces we want to amplify, and how do we accompany people in this loop, as the loop itself changes almost every week. So what we decided to do in our research team is actually to try to see whether we could come up with a methodology to define competencies that were specifically useful for generative AI. And we did work that followed the approach I'm summarizing here. The goal was to define this framework that could delineate a set of competencies around generative AI literacy, and that could conceptualize in practice how users actually can approach these tools. And the methodology was largely a conceptual methodology, given the newness of these tools. We first conducted a database search around these topics on multiple databases. After that, we did a literature review on relevant areas with respect to the concept itself of AI literacy, but also systematic reviews with respect to Gen AI and how they are applied in multiple domains in society. we looked specifically at technical issues related, for instance, with prompt engineering. And we also looked at competency models that they have been proposed, not in the AI literature, but more generally in the literature. With the literature review, then we identified competencies, and this is what the framework offers as an output. We decided to use the model of competencies defined by the National Institute of Health of the United States, where they define competencies around 4 different dimensions: knowledge, ability, skill, and behavior, because we thought that, well, it's general enough to describe the kind of competencies that one would need to interact with a system, but also, well, because they are existent and used by several institutions. So knowledge is defined by NIH as information developed or learned through experience, study, or investigation. Ability is defined as innate potential to perform mental or physical actions or tasks. Skill is defined as the result of repeatedly applying knowledge or ability. And behavior is seen as the observable reaction of an individual to a certain situation. Based on these definitions of competencies and the methodology I described in the previous slide, we spent time trying to identify what could be, in our opinion, core competencies in the context of Gen AI, and this is the model that, the framework that emerged from that. It is a model of that identifies 12 competencies. Some of them are about knowledge, some of them are about skill, some of them are about ability. And as you can see in the slide, it covers really a lot of space, a lot of territory. It ranges from understanding basic principles of AI to understanding the capacities and limitations of the tools, to the actual ability to use the tools, to assess the output of the tools, specific skill related to prompting, as prompting is a way in which most of us are going to interact with these models in the future. For more technically oriented people, you will have, for instance, the ability to program and fine-tune models, which requires a different level of skill with respect to programming or understanding of machine learning. And then there are aspects that are just as important as the knowledge of the ethical implications, the knowledge of the legal aspects, and the knowledge of the context in which these tools are being used. So you can see it's a very vast territory, but at least we try to put some basic order around the different dimensions of competencies that would be ideal to be able to effectively and correctly and ethically use these tools. So our intention from having defined the model, which has been accepted as a conceptual paper in a digital government journal of the ACM recently, is to take it and start defining in more detail the elements that would pertain to each of these modules and pilot them in specific contexts. So if any of you in the audience is interested in knowing more about this model, or have some ideas on specific domains in which you think a conceptual model like this would be useful, I'll be very happy to hear from you now or offline. So this brings me to the end of the talk, just to say that much of the work we are doing and will continue to do for the years to come is going to be systematized around the creation of a Center for Participatory AI that was launched at the end of last year, and that essentially involves many of the ingredients that I have mentioned throughout the talk. So again, if anybody would like to know more or potentially be interested in knowing about the activities or even work together, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so this brings me to the end, and I cannot claim to have the expertise to give you the definite conclusion, but I can give you some sort of conclusion. And I'm gonna essentially start with the questions I asked at the beginning. To me, what's gonna continue to shape AI in the future, unless we do something, will be big tech. And if we don't want big tech to be the only ones who dictate what AI looks like in the future, we need to answer these questions. And we need to engage in a process that is participatory, that is democratic, and that is active. Let me finish with some analogy. So this object that you see there, I think in many cultures, people would recognize it. And you could perhaps argue that many of the adjectives that we want to give to AI actually apply to many things we use in our daily life. For instance, we trust that this coffee machine is going to do one thing. We understand what this machine does. We can get coffee grains from different parts of the world and prepare the coffee we prefer. we can make coffee for ourselves or for our friends, or our friends can do coffee for us. In the end, it's important to think that AI is a thing. It's an object. It's nothing else than that. And of course, it's very complex, right? Of course, it's extremely powerful, but it's still a thing, still an object. So my hope would be that as the AI Act comes into play, as literacy increases, and as participatory process also continue, we might be able to think of AI systems in the future as things that can be very useful, but not as the kind of semi-God dimension that some of these tools and some of these companies would like us to believe they are. So with this, I would like to conclude by thanking the members of our research group and also the partners for the two projects I mentioned, the Sensitivity Project and the Icarus Project, and would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was, I mean, really, for me personally, and I think for many in the audience, very enlightening. You know, we often talk about inclusive AI and all these things, and then, you know, my question and a lot of people's question often is, okay, how do we do that? And you gave some like really great examples of how we actually start moving towards that, and not just keep talking about the need for it. I already have a couple questions, so I'll jump right in. Katerina asks, what is the relation between participatory AI and the democratization of AI? And how important is the role of local governments in enabling both?
So the difference between participatory AI and democratization?
The democratization of AI. Is there a link between them? And what do you see for local actors in particular in that setting?
Yeah, so I think for me, the concept of democratizing AI, it still feels a bit top-down in the sense that someone allows people to use AI in a more democratic way. And this could be seen as a good feature or as a good practice that big tech designed for, you know, for the general user to be able to use these technologies. Participatory AI, for me, it's more bottom-up. It's essentially to make active decisions about what you would like AI to look like, and then to engage to make those designs real. Of course, most likely you would use similar technologies, but the way in which the designs will be conceptualized will be perhaps very different. So democratizing AI allows everybody to use the tools, but participatory AI would allow people to decide what those tools should be. And to me, this larger agency and this clear element on debating and collectively arriving at decisions is not necessarily present if you just think of democratizing AI as like tools that are there for everybody to use.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with respect to the local actors, so having worked with cities in the European project that I mentioned, I could see and here, you know, I'm not speaking on their behalf; it's just my personal opinion. Clearly, the challenges they have to deal with are very, very large, as you know, the focus areas that I mentioned clearly illustrate. One of the big challenges is that just identifying what could be the right tool might be a big issue, right? And unlike researchers who are, you know, used to fail, cities are not used to be in a culture of failure. Because failure typically costs votes in the next election. So this is a very important difference between doing research or working in a corporation where failure is tolerable with respect to when you want to apply any of these techniques within an institution that doesn't have necessarily built in a culture of failure as an acceptable output of a project. So in the context of cities, I think a nice model that I have seen in some cases is living labs or city labs that are specific spaces for innovation, but that are safe innovations in the sense that they are not going to affect the full infrastructure if something goes wrong, right? But they allow the city to explore solutions that could be done in a relatively rapid way, that could always get citizen feedback, and that, if successful, could be tested in increasingly more complex settings.
Yeah, interesting. I see a few other questions here. Carlos has a request for maybe some more detail how did Stuttgart, I think you mentioned Stuttgart, use AI to stop radicalization? Was that a thing you mentioned?
Yeah, I have to mention that in the end, none of the cities decided to use AI. So the cities collectively decided, each of them follow their own process, and they decided that in many cases they didn't even need information and communication technology. So in the case of Stuttgart, what the city has implemented is essentially using artists that go on the street and enact a performance that engage people to talk about the risks and perhaps the factors that can lead someone to move in a radical position. So it is a very important question to be asked, because I did not want to send the message that other cities actually use AI. So in this case, nobody decided to use AI. And what is interesting is, conceptually, is that in each case, this was the result of a deliberative process that was focused on the solution, so focus on the problem, and then what is the adequate solution to the problem, rather than to focus on we need to use AI at some point.
So there wasn't, I mean, I don't know if you saw this level of detail, but there wasn't like a aversion to using AI or some worry about using it. It just wasn't the most practical solution.
Exactly, because cities might be using some technology within their daily practice, but as this deliberative process evolved, it was clear that for that particular envisioned solution, it was not a component that had an intrinsic high value.
Interesting. I think I see another question that also kind of came up for me as you were going through your conclusions about when you said, right now big tech is getting to make all the decisions, and how a participatory approach is needed to move away from that. Zia asked, is participatory AI only or more relevant for social science topics, research like that, or do we also see interest from the commercial side? I mean, I don't know if you have any experience with companies or big tech, and are they also interested in this topic, or do you see relevance of it for them?
Yeah, so I think the spirit of participation to understand tools and to reshape them is probably very general. If you think how some of these technologies are being adopted or will be soon adopted, for instance, in local government, just to deal with day-to-day services. If you think about the combination of not enough knowledge of how these tools work, and then clearly not enough knowledge of how these systems will fail, this is essentially an explosive combination for anybody who is legally responsible for something, whether it is a city, whether it is a company, whether it is a school district. So participatory approaches, in my opinion, can always help to spread knowledge, help to spread previous experiences, help to increase literacy, and in the end, as these systems continue to be used, there might be a larger knowledge base, right, that emerges, and that hopefully could be reusable across instances of the same situation. I'm thinking in the case of cities, some of these tools that have been designed, for instance, the goal was to make them reusable, that some of the city could actually say, oh, I want to work on the same topic, how can I adapt what you have produced? So to me, the participatory approach also has to do with that, with the reutilization of knowledge, and obviously the understanding that it always has to be adapted to the local context.
We have a question here, and it'll build off of something I was going to ask anyways, more about the makeup of these participatory groups, right? So we also try to bring together stakeholders on different topics, and I often see or worry that it's actually hard to get to those most vulnerable or marginalized people to get into those groups as well. So one side of it is, how do you make sure kind of you have representativeness in this participatory process, and what difficulties did you find? And then Omar also asked, similarly, what if the people in these groups that you're trying to engage with don't actually know what they want or can't decide? Like this is a general problem with deliberative processes, but have you had any tactics or experiences with either side of those questions?
Yeah, so this is a really, really important question. And when we think about it, it doesn't have to do anything with the technology part, right? It is, about bringing people to the table, and then identifying a topic that would bring people to the table, right? I think it's very contextual and very local. What specific methods, what specific strategies could work better? I mean, there might be some general frameworks that would be good, but some of them might fail. I mean, a very basic idea, of course, is to meet people where they are, right? The case in Mexico, essentially, we knew that the work had to be done in the school because that's where students were. We also knew that we needed to talk to parents because they, many of the students were minors, but also because parents could also contribute to the campaign in one way or another. We needed to engage teachers because it is through teachers that we could, our partners in Mexico could talk to students. What worked in that particular case was, on one hand, meeting people where they are, and then accepting that an action research project really is about, in the end, is really about what people would be willing to do from the perspective of their interest. We had this element of let's co-design what problems we want to address in the project. Let's try to identify what dimensions of the physical space we would like to focus on. And it was by opening the process like that there was, on one hand, the expression of interests, of different interests, and then the collective definition of what would be the final decisions. Something I didn't mention in the talk, but was an interesting situation that could be also replicable when you think about how to bring people to the table is this intergenerational aspect. So, for instance, some of the goals of the project were about documenting historical monuments, so people, areas that people feel very proud about, and they're going to be typically, beautiful architecture, old architecture, and so on. We explored the possibility of asking students to talk to their grandparents and to ask them, where should I go that I probably don't know, but I should know, but and if we think of this intergenerational aspect, it is true that older citizens will have the historical background, perhaps the background of places of the city that have been transformed, but that in itself will be very important to document. It so happens that also perhaps more, older users might not have as much physical mobility as teenagers have, especially in cities like the one you saw that have hills and mountains. So we found that enlarging the community through natural links, in this case, family links, right, could also be a good strategy. So these are just two hints, right? Meeting people where they are, and then thinking about who are the natural networks of people that could bring them to the table.
And finding ways to kind of match skills, right? Knowledge skills with maybe capacity to move around and use tools skills. It's related to, Dotsie had a similar question, and I'll bring it up quickly. Participatory presupposes capacity or capability of having a deliberatory ability. How do we measure that capacity for an agent to be part of the participatory process?
Yeah, that is a really important question, and it's not an easy one to answer, right? Because specifically with respect to these new technologies, we need to accept that the capacity of most of us is very low with respect to what we actually know about how the systems do and how they work and how they fail. On the other hand, we do have, in some cases, knowledge about what we would like these systems to do, or what we would like these systems not to do. And perhaps that's not necessarily a capacity, but it's certainly an expression of potential agency about what to do with these tools, right? So I think capacity building is part of the process, because we all need to learn collectively as we go on the process itself about how these technologies operate. And the reason why I was mentioning this conceptual framework at the end of the talk is essentially about that. For me, much of the work that needs to be done together is this process of increasing our literacy, which in itself can be problematic, because who define what is what is good knowledge and what is not good knowledge, that in itself brings other important power issues. But again, I trust that a participatory process could also define what are the skills, the abilities, the knowledge that the community itself should aim as the commons, right, to develop and to acquire and then to share.
Yeah, really interesting. I liked how in one of the methods you showed, there's a whole part there for kind of defining the problem set, and that's also, you don't come in with that has to be developed by the people themselves. We're running low on time, but I have one question that's moving over to this in learning environments. So in making society more AI literate, how will schools implement these newer learning goals? There are currently huge differences across EU countries in both applying digitization education as well as achieving basic IT learning goals with students. Examples include both software agility and caution when processing online data for scientific work. I feel there's a big gap to make that jump to AI agility. This is from INSAF, so maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I cannot frame it better than it was already exposed, and probably comes from someone who has a lot of knowledge in the educational domain. So what I can tell you is conversations I've had with colleagues who work, for instance, in the Pedagogical School in Switzerland. So the curricula of soon-to-be teachers is changing, and one of the big questions is how should these concepts be introduced for future teachers. That is one clear angle where there will be long-term impact if whoever needs to make that decision makes the right choices. There's a second element on what do we do with our current teachers, and that includes me that's teaching at a university, right? How do we approach these new technologies for our daily practice, which could be teaching or mentoring? This in itself is a huge endeavor. So I fully agree with the comment expressed before. To me, the fact that the main actors of learning, which are students or learners, right, youth and young, kids and young people, so there also we need to rely on their knowledge, right? Because quite often they are some of the early adopters of technology, and this has happened so many times, either with social media and now with AI, before with audiovisual media. How to make the best use of their fairly advanced knowledge as users of technology is perhaps something that we could consider more deliberately as we move forward at all levels. Great. But yeah, it's a very complex question and
certainly, and a big one.
Yeah,
one that's coming up more and more. Thank you all for your questions. And again, thank you, Daniel. I think this, again, for me, was very enlightening and really puts forward one of the goals of the IEAI too, is to move from this kind of talk to practice. How do we really, put these practices into place? So I'd like to thank you again for accepting our invitation, and all of you for joining us and contributing to the discussion. To our audience, please stay tuned for our next talks to come, where we'll continue to welcome our distinguished guests. Our next speaker series will be on July 3rd at the TUM Think Tank, so it's in person at 12:30. And the topic will be Generative AI Systems, Ethical and Societal Issues, and the Implications for the AI Act. It'll be given by Raha Chatila, Professor of Artificial Intelligence, Robotics, and Ethics at Sorbonne in Paris. So I hope to see many of you there for that, and continue to watch us for our next virtual events as well. Thank you, Daniel, and I hope you all have a nice day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.